So, did anyone else read the title of this album and believe that Vreid had gone the Wayfarer route and straight up made an album set in the wild, wild west? No? Just me? Cool. Awesome. Fucking fantastic. I feel like such a fucking genius right now. Wild Northwest is the 9th studio album from Norwegian black and roll crew Vreid, a band that I've really only been mildly interested in at best this past decade due to them having a now somewhat inconsistent discography. I'll happily give credit where it's due, their first few albums are pretty damn good, and I am a huge fan of all of the material these gentlemen made when they were a part of another Norwegian black metal crew called Windir. But as far as the last handful of Vreid records are concerned, they have ranged from being briefly entertaining slices of Norwegian fury to being ultimately derivative and forgettable slices of generic black and roll. For these reasons, I wasn't really super pumped for Wild Northwest, to put it lightly, but I'm still approached with genuine optimism and enthusiasm based on some of the stuff I had heard beforehand, and based on the overall size of this project in comparison to previous Vreid records. See, this is no regular Vreid album. This is a concept album about Vreid's own roots, about the roots of Norwegian black metal itself, a concept album that, may I add, has been developed alongside a full-length motion picture, which will be available to watch by the time this album is available to listen to. Unfortunately, I will not be able to include my thoughts on that film in this review due to the fact that I haven't seen it, but nonetheless, its mere existence urged me to stay as open-minded as possible, and to consider the fact that maybe this Vreid album would be a step back in the right direction. And booyah, Wild Northwest has proven to be mostly that. Not 100% exactly that, but at least maybe 65-70% kind of that. By no means is Wild Northwest a particularly innovative and incredible record of earth-shattering proportions, but at the very least, it does provide the tasty black and roll jams that I'm sure many longtime fans would expect from Vreid at this point. The songwriting on this album is a lot more fluid, a lot more cohesive, a lot more memorable than on previous albums. The production is a lot stronger. It feels surprisingly very inviting, despite having a very cold and ominous atmosphere and aesthetic. Thanks in no small part to the album's subtle but wise implementation of keyboards and organs, all of which do a great job at setting up a very stark and bitter atmosphere without turning this into a total gloom fest. As a result, everything still feels very lively, dare I say even fun, even in moments that on a regular black metal record maybe wouldn't or even shouldn't be. The opening number and title track Wild Northwest is a great example of everything I'm talking about. It has a very raucous and energetic spirit to it while retaining its cult black metal energy. An outcome that impressively is still achieved even as some tracks head into darker and more atypical black metal territory. Take, for instance, the semi-haunting and adventurous melodic black metal of Wolves at Sea, or the Windir-esque majesty of Into the Mountains, the latter of which stands as an oddly heartwarming moment on the record due to its inclusion of a long-lost keyboard demo from Hváll, whose death resulted in the formation of Vreid. Although I should note that right near the end of this track, it devolves into a really weird kind of jam rock thing that I'm not personally a fan of at all, but hey, everything up until this moment, that's pretty solid. You also have tracks like The Morning Red and Dazed and Reduced, which have a nice balance of melody and melancholy, straying into some slower territory without bringing the album to a complete halt. Dazed and Reduced even appears to take a page from the book of Opus eponymous era Ghost, with some surprisingly energetic vintage hard rock riffs and some very soulful vocals. Not every song on this album is an absolute banger. In fact, there are some pretty generic and forgettable pieces of black metal sandwiched in between these exceptional pieces, namely Spikes of God and the closing number Shadowland. But they're not really bad per se, and in defense of the latter Shadowland, it does end this album on an appropriately dark and epic note. The bigger issue for me would be the execution of the so-called concept on here. It's great to see Vreid go back to their roots musically, but this isn't something contrary to Vreid's belief that really ties into the narrative of the album itself. Now, to be fair, this album was developed alongside the Wild Northwest film. Therefore, I have to assume that they are meant to be enjoyed together rather than separately. But at the same time, if that's true, that now creates a new problem for Wild Northwest. If it was never meant to be enjoyed as a standalone record, if it was truly meant to be enjoyed alongside a film, then why is it being released as a standalone record at all? This is kind of a common problem with these multimedia projects organized by rock bands, classic example being Pink Floyd's The Wall, the movie, amazing, the album, I can live without it. Obviously, I never expected Vreid to fix this problem, but it is disappointing that they nonetheless fall into the same trap. I'm also not vibing with all of the vocal deliveries on this thing. For the most part, the vocals are solid, but sometimes they're a little bit too nasally and acidic for their own good. When contrasted with some of the really heavy material on this album, it honest to God sounds like a prepubescent goblin whining and moaning. Put very simply, an album's worth of can get pretty tiring pretty quickly. Still, I enjoyed enough of this album that I'm willing to give it a mostly enthusiastic 3 to 5. There's genuine spirit and vigor and enthusiasm in Vreid, which I don't know if I necessarily heard in some of their other records. The production is really good, a lot of the songs are really good. I really like Into the Mountains, it makes me long for the glory days of Windeer. Oh, God, I miss that fucking band. Side note, if for whatever reason you have one of those super cool Windeer box sets and for whatever reason you'd like to part with it, give me a fucking call. This album, with or without the movie, has already mostly succeeded in all of the areas where a Norwegian black metal album needs to succeed. And ultimately, that's what the Vreid fans are going to care about, that's what they're going to eat up, and more fucking power to them. So again, 3 to 5. Maybe not something I'll personally return to, but it's decent. I enjoyed it while it was on, and I see no reason why longtime Vreid fans would be disappointed with this. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.